January 15th, 1947. 10:06 a.m. A cold, clear post-war morning in Los Angeles. A local mother named Betty Bersinger was pushing her young daughter's stroller down the sidewalk in the quiet, developing neighborhood of Leimert Park. She noticed something pale and strange dumped in the overgrown grass of a vacant lot near a fire hydrant. From a distance, it looked like a mannequin, the kind you see in a department store window, snapped in half, discarded like trash. She moved closer, expecting to find a piece of plastic. Instead, she found a nightmare. It was the naked body of a young woman, severed perfectly in half at the waist. The blood had been entirely drained, the skin a waxy, unnatural pallor. The body was posed. The arms were raised over her head, the legs spread. But it wasn't the bisection that sent Betty Bersinger running for the nearest phone in horror. It was the face. The killer had sliced the woman's mouth from ear to ear in a grotesque permanent smile, known as a Glasgow smile. Thus began not just a manhunt, but the creation of a dark legend. The body was that of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. But the world would come to know her by another name, a name coined by the press and etched forever in American crime. This is the file on Hollywood's most notorious haunting case, the Black Dahlia Dossier. To understand the crime, you must understand the city and the victim. Los Angeles in 1947 was a powder keg of dreams and corruption. It was the post-war boomtown, flooded with soldiers returning from the Pacific, and thousands of young women, just like Elizabeth Short, flocking in with stars in their eyes. But beneath the Hollywood sign, the city was run by a notoriously corrupt police department. The LAPD of the 1940s was known for brutality, payoffs, and looking the other way, an environment where a killer might feel untouchable. Elizabeth Short, herself, was not a star. She was an aspirant. Born in Massachusetts, she was a drifter, a beautiful enigma who floated through the city's diners, bars, and hotel lobbies. She had a fondness for black tailored clothing and often wore a flower in her dark hair. It gave her the air of a B-movie femme fatale, a look she cultivated. But friends would say she was more naive than seductive, a young woman who was often broke, living on favors, crashing on couches. She wasn't a prostitute, as the press later claimed. She was just lost. She was in LA not to be a famous actress, but perhaps just to be someone. She was a ghost in the system, the kind of person who could vanish for days without anyone raising the alarm. And in the week before her murder, she did just that. Her trail went cold. She was last seen alive on January 9th, 7 days before her body was found. A married salesman named Robert "Red" Manley, with whom she'd had a brief platonic date, dropped her off at the Grand Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. She told him she was going to meet her sister. She walked into the opulent, crowded lobby and vanished into history. For 7 days, she was missing. This is a period police later dubbed the missing week. No one knows where she was. No one knows who she was with. No one knows how she fell into the hands of the man who would turn her into a macabre icon. The killer was not just a violent man. He was a technician, a showman. Elizabeth Short's body was posed with deliberate, shocking intent. The arms were raised, the legs spread. The cut that severed her was clean, precise. It was a hemicorporectomy, a brutal procedure that required skill. This was not a crime of rage. It was a dissection. She had been tortured for days. The rope marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck proved she had been bound and held captive. There were cuts, bruises, and cigarette burns all over her body. And, most disturbingly, she had been cleaned. The killer had drained her body of all blood elsewhere, washed it meticulously, and then dumped it in the Leimert Park lot, without leaving a single drop of blood at the scene. He wanted her to be found. He wanted his work to be seen. The LAPD investigation was immediate, but it was also a circus. The case became the biggest media event in LA history. The Black Dahlia, a nickname coined by the press after the 1946 film noir The Blue Dahlia, was on every front page. The newspapers of the day, specifically the empires of William Randolph Hearst and Norman Chandler, waged a war for sensationalism. They didn't just report the news, they created it. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner infamously contacted Elizabeth's mother, claiming her daughter had won a beauty contest just to get quotes. They stole family photographs from her home, which they then published. This media storm contaminated the case from day one. Over 60 people, mostly lonely and disturbed men, confessed to the crime, trying to steal a piece of the notoriety. The already overwhelmed police department had to run down every single false confession, diverting precious resources from a trail that was already ice cold. Then, about a week after the body was found, the killer finally made contact. On January 23rd, a package arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. It was addressed to the Examiner and other LA papers. It was a taunt from the killer himself. Inside was a collection of Elizabeth Short's belongings, her social security card, her birth certificate, business cards, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. Several pages had been ripped out. The items had been meticulously wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any fingerprints. The message was clear. I have what you're looking for, but you'll never catch me. A few days later, a second note arrived. This one a bizarre cut-and-paste letter made from magazine clippings. It read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The killer was playing with the police, just as he was playing with the press. The hunt intensified, but the trail was a fog. The address book led police to dozens of men, servicemen, Hollywood playboys, petty criminals. All were investigated, and all were cleared. The killer, who had been so bold, so theatrical in his display, simply vanished. He faded back into the shadows of the corrupt city, leaving behind only a broken body and an immortal name. The decades passed. The Black Dahlia file was never closed. It became the defining cold case of Los Angeles. And with time, the theories grew darker and stranger. They pointed not to a random drifter, but to the highest circles of the city's elite. The most potent and terrifying theory centered on one man, Dr. George Hodel. Hodel was, by all accounts, a brilliant man, a genius IQ, a wealthy and respected surgeon. He lived in a bizarre Mayan-style mansion in Hollywood known as the Sowden House, a place that looked like a set from a horror movie. He ran in LA's surrealist art scene, counting figures like the artist Man Ray among his friends. He was also a man of deep, dark secrets, including accusations of incest with his own daughter, Tamar. This theory was not born from internet forums. It was built by a career LAPD homicide detective, George Hodel's own son, Steve Hodel. Decades after the murder, Steve began his own investigation into his father. What he found was chilling. He discovered his father, Dr. Hodel, had been a prime suspect in the original 1947 investigation. He found photos of a dark-haired woman, who he believes was Elizabeth Short, among his father's belongings. He confirmed his father had the advanced surgical training needed to perform the bisection. He discovered that George Hodel was friends with the publisher of the LA Times and had deep connections within the corrupt LAPD, connections that could make a file disappear. But the most damning evidence came from the LAPD's own archives. In 1950, police had secretly bugged George Hodel's home during the incest investigation. Steve Hodel found the transcripts. On the tapes, detectives heard the doctor discussing the Dahlia case. In one chilling exchange, Hodel is heard saying to a visitor, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Steve Hodel's theory is this. His father, George Hodel, lured Elizabeth Short to the Sowden House. He tortured and murdered her there, possibly in a secret, sealed-off room. He then used his medical skill to mutilate the body and his police connections to cover his tracks. In this light, the case isn't just an unsolved mystery. It's a cover-up. It is the dark story of power, privilege, and decay at the very heart of the Hollywood dream. George Hodel was never charged. He knew the walls were closing in, and in 1950, he moved to the Philippines where he lived out his life and died an unpunished man. Today, the case remains officially open, but it is a ghost. The Black Dahlia is less a person and more a symbol. She is the ultimate victim of the dark side of Los Angeles, the city that draws in dreamers and sometimes devours them whole. The killer got exactly what he wanted. He created a terrifying, immortal work of art, a puzzle that America would never stop trying to solve. Her file is cold, but the mystery only deepens. Some stories were never meant for the light, but they are the stories that must be told. They are the files that must be opened. This has been a file from America's Dark Dossier. If you believe that the past is never truly dead, subscribe and help us open the next file.